is an outstanding topic that created daily problems between the GCC countries, the intellectuals, the press. All the topics are centered on Iran, as Iran is a superpower that plays a big role. The other opinion is that Iran is a superpower that should not interfere in the Arab affairs. We respect and appreciate Iran as a superpower. Yet, we expect to see our mutual relations reinforced rather than influencing or intervening in other countries' affairs, especially that Iran is playing a big role in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, and even in some GCC countries. We are limited in time, and we should be done by 2:30, and I believe I will assign 15 minutes to each speaker. We start by Mr. Mustafa Abu al-Khair, a legal expert, jurist, graduate of law school from Egypt. His major is the Egyptian Court for Cassation. He is a professor in Omar al-Muqaddam University in Libya. He authored many of, compiled a large number of studies and research in Arabic. Please take the floor. May God's peace be upon you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I extend all thanks to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for the generous information. My paper is on the legal status of the disputed islands between Iran and the United Arab Emirates in view of the common law. I examined the crisis from the current state of then the reasons and then the strategic importance. And I also demonstrated the views of both the sides to the dispute, United Arab Emirates and Iran, and also addressed the legal characterization of the dispute over these islands. The islands have strategic significance as the party in control of the islands is in total control of the Gulf, and I also demonstrated the views of both the sides. Emirates relied on historical roots as the Arab Qaboos ruled these rules for thousands of years. And Iran tried to hire these islands, which indicates that these islands are belonging to the Arabs. I also analyze this in view of the international law. And here I will address the points of international law in a non-biased, impartial stand. First, on the 29th of November 1971, before the declaration of United Arab Emirates on the 2nd of December, they occupied Tamb al-Kubra, Tamb al-Sughra, and Abu Musa, and it was agreement to divide or share the island, and they removed the troops. On the 29th of November 1971 is in violation of a number of principles in the international common law. First is the incriminating of usurpation of islands by force. And second, taking legacy from imperialism. And Article 4 of the United Nations Charters, it's Article 2, Paragraph 2 is enforcement of agreements in goodwill. There is a established legal principle that politics or political misleadings corrupts the legal characterization of issues. It is known that under the international law, that the usurper or the occupier has no right to lawful defense. If the country is an assailant, as I said, this represents a violation of the military occupation under Article 42 of the regulations to the Hague Agreement, and also the second article of Geneva Convention 1949. That's why Iran, as an occupying country, should observe all the obligations of an occupying state as been stipulated in the Hague Law and the 4 Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols of 1977. It is obligated to maintain the safety, well-being, and security of the civil residents. And this is what is Iran not observing and occupying the 3 islands. It's a violation of the military occupation. It is also should observe the status of employees, as the law stipulates that the public servants and public employees cannot be violated nor changed. And Iran violated this, as Iran prevented all the employees to have access to the islands and dismissed the Arab employees, thus violating the military occupation law. And as the Fourth Geneva Convention has laid down certain terms which were violated by Iran, 27, 35, 47, 147 of the Fourth Convention as the international criminal law. What was done by Iran is an act of aggression, as Article 5 of the Articles of Association of the International Criminal Court, and expulsion and forcible dislocation and displacement of the residents is also a violation of law. The international humanitarian law was violated also by Iran, namely the 4 Geneva Convention 1949 and the 2 additional protocols of 1977. The international human rights law is also violated by Iran by its act of on the 29th of November by occupying, namely Article 12 of the UN Human Rights Charter, and also Article 13, which stipulates for the freedom of choice of domicile within the state, as the Iranian occupation forces forced people out of the residence. Also express and gross violations of all Arab, domestic, regional, international, and American human rights and the international declaration. We demonstrated the case to the international charters, namely the UN charters, and it is evidenced that the acts of Iran is in violation of Article 1 and 2 of the principles and objectives of the United Nations Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 2, Article 2, Paragraph 4, relating to the use of force, military armed force. It is also in violation of first and second articles of the Charter of the League of Arab States, and also amicable settlement of disputes. Iran violated the Islamic Conference Charter, organization's charter. And as time is running short, Iran also violated the charter of both United Nations, League of Arab States, and Islamic Conference Organization. The International Court could have settled either under a 3-member or 5-member arbitration panel, or presenting the dispute to the International Court of Justice, or an application be filed by the United Nations to the International Justice Court to provide a touristic view on the legal status of these islands, who has the right and entitlement to these islands and have sovereignty over them. Also, the International Criminal Court or Court of Justice could have provided an opinion on the jurisdiction. However, Iran has denied all the proposals to present it to 3-member or 5-member arbitration panel or the International Justice Court or seek consultation. And I believe the United Arab Emirates is in a position to do so, as the UN Charter vested in the 6 organs of the UN body to seek a juristic advice, and the decline by Iran of amicable settlement is a living proof that the islands are Arab Emirati belonging to the United Arab Emirates are not Iranian, and I believe the political differences has undermined the legal characterization of the dispute. And I thank the speaker. I believe to be the last speaker, as I have a technical problem with my presentation. We move to Muhammad Saad al-Muqaddam from Oman. He led a number of scientific seminars, namely in history. His master's degree is on the Omani-US relations, a PhD thesis on Omani-US relations. Dr. Muhammad, please, I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for organizing this wonderful seminar, warm hospitality and generosity. When we speak about the relations between Oman and Iran, one day or even 1 year is not enough. However, due to the geographical locations of both the countries, the relations date back 2,000 years in history. And since I have only 15 minutes in hand, I will focus on the relations, bilateral relations since 1970. Interaction and cooperation between Iran and Oman has continued even with the age of modernity in 1970 under the leadership of His Royal Majesty Sultan Qaboos. A new era of building the modern state by initiating sound diplomatic relations with world states, and Iran was the 3rd country to recognize the new leadership of Oman. This opened a new chapter in the bilateral relations, and the cooperation developed as His Royal Majesty paid a visit to Iran in October 1971. It was the 2nd to be paid by him after holding the reins of power. Iran had their first ambassador in Muscat in 1973 and appointed acting attaché in 1974. Oman appointed its appointed attaché in Iran. This also extended to the security that threatened Oman and the Gulf, and on 30th of November 1973, the first batch of Iranian troops arrived at Oman in 1975. Zufar War came to an end, and Iran military support played a big role in this. With the advent of the Islamic revolution in Iran, a new chapter of political diplomatic relations between the two countries started in 1979. Sultan Qaboos dispatched a diplomatic delegation to Iran, where they met with the supreme leader Ayatollah Alma in his court in Qom. This meeting stressed the historical relations between the two countries. The declaration of the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Oman was the first countries to recognize and congratulate the new leadership. And in this fashion, bilateral relations developed rapidly. Omani-Iranian relations continued to survive amid regional challenges, namely Oman's stand towards the Iranian war. Stand based on declining war and resorting to the sound of reason, standing up to any calls for severing relations with Iran. Based on this, Oman rejected any calls to boycott Iran or sever diplomatic and economic relations with Iran during the Arab League meetings in 1987. Also refused to issue a condemnation statement, refusing Iraq to use their lands or military facilities to launch offensive on Iran. As the war raged for years, His Royal Majesty emphasized the significance of dialogue to put an end to this ferocious conflict. Omani diplomacy eased tension in the atmospheres as much as possible. With the end of the Iraq-Iranian war, bilateral relations developed in the strategic cooperation, in addition to diplomatic, social, and cultural cooperations. And under Muhammad Khatami, 1979-2005, prosperity and economic cooperation, where the visit by Khatami to Oman was the first visit by an Iranian president since 1934, followed by high-level official visits that paid by Fahd Mahmoud to Tehran, where a number of economic, security, and cultural agreements were signed. The joint Iranian-Omani committees crystallize the patterns of cooperation between economic, trade, energy investment, security, and culture. 1979, the Iranian Energy Ministry won a contract to build the energy plant. Also, there are agreements to develop gas and petrochemical industries. Since Mahmoud Ahmadinejad came to power in Iran in 2005, the Iranian-Omani relations continued to witness development in all levels. In return, Fahd bin Mahmoud paid a visit to Iran in 2008. This visit enabled both the countries to examine means of cooperation which helped positively develop the bilateral relations. Also, the exchange of views on a number of significant issues of interest will lead to common understanding and push forward towards cementing cooperation to the best interest of the peoples of the country. The recent visit, the visit paid by Sultan Qaboos bin Said to Iran in 2009, and his meeting with Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran then, where he continued to stress the necessity to cement cooperation. This meeting yielded in the signing of agreement in terms of security, in addition to a number of memorandums of understanding, economic, social, and cultural cooperation. This led to bringing the viewpoints closer, namely in very significant issues, including the Iranian nuclear issue, Iran's relations to other countries. Later, we will see the Omani's role as a mediator between GCC and Iran, Egypt and Iran, the United States and Iran. Following the election of President Rouhani, His Royal Majesty was the first Arab Gulf to visit Iran, and recently was Oman always seeks in its foreign policy impartial foreign policy to play a positive role in easing political tensions in the Gulf region. That's why Oman always enjoyed the trust and confidence of the GCC countries. It is a big player actively involved at this level, and that's why it enjoyed the trust and confidence of Arab and regional international players. That's why Oman had a role in the recent negotiations that took place recently. We had hoped that an agreement would have been signed and the issue of Iranian nuclear power that started in 2002 would have come to an end. Oman acts with one goal: to steer the region away from any military confrontation. Any military confrontation will undermine any form of development. That's why we are calling for peaceful coexistence with Iran. The role is no secret, yet it is meant to steer the oil-rich Gulf region away from military confrontation. This oil-rich is significant to development not only in the GCC countries but also in the Arab world. That's why Oman maintains good relations with the GCC, Arab countries, and West countries. Oman is taking an impartial stand, and that's why it took that stand in all the Gulf countries, the Gulf wars, and Iraqi war. Thank you very much for listening, and forgive me for taking much more the time assigned to me. We thank Mr. Mohammed for observing the time assigned. I move the floor to Mr. Joseph Kéchichian, an American Armenian specialized in the Islamic studies. He's working for King Faisal Center in Saudi Arabia. He promised that next year he will speak in English, but today he will address you in English. In the name of Allah, I will present my paper in English as I didn't have time to have it translated. And a request for additional 5 minutes. I would like to point out that the paper I will present is a personal analysis, not representative of any official body.
Although there was no reason to believe that Saudi Arabia and Iran were destined for permanent animosity, theirs cannot and never will be an alliance, because so much more divides them than united the two leading powers that were once perceived as twin pillars by the United States. In fact, the legacy of the Islamic Revolution brought to the surface the many contradictory interests that, for all practical purposes, sealed the long-term direction they each pursued. Still, in the post-2010 Arab uprising era, which distinguished itself from the period that immediately followed the Cold War by introducing so many internal dynamics, Riyadh and Tehran could no longer afford to ignore the spillover effects of ongoing tensions. The two sides could at best agree to lower tensions, but few anticipated such an outcome. Simply stated, Iran concluded that its positions in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and even in Bahrain were existential and must not be surrendered. This was their moment, Iranian leaders believed, which meant that they were ready to embark on confrontational policies to defend their perceived interests. Unlike President Ahmadinejad, however, who seldom missed an opportunity to remind Saudis of the revolution's glorious achievements in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine, and of course in Syria, the new President Hassan Rouhani opted for a subdued projection of power. Rouhani understood that regional coexistence required Iranian foreign policy to return to the Rafsanjani-Khatami lines that accommodated Riyadh, given the latter's undeniable role in Arab and Muslim affairs. In fact, Rouhani shocked everyone, including the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, when he called Saudi Arabia, quote, a friend and a brother. This was on 7th May 2013, a pledge that if elected, he would prepare a civil rights charter, restore the economy, and improve rocky relations with most of the world. Rouhani won the election. He addressed a meeting of Hajj officials in Tehran in September 2013, thus barely a month in office. He expressed his government's willingness to remove trivial tensions from the path of bilateral ties with Saudi Arabia in order to fulfill bilateral and the Islamic world's interests. Excuse me. According to a statement distributed by the state-sponsored Tasnim news agency, the Iranian president emphasized that the very need to expand and presumably improve ties were emphasized both in the Saudi king's congratulatory letter to him and by the letter that he sent to thank him. Now, inasmuch as Rouhani's top priority was to improve ties with neighboring countries, his pledge to work with the Al-Saud to limit the damage that Iranian interferences throughout the Middle East was, of course, welcome. Riyadh was happy to hear such declarations and hoped that over the long term, Rouhani's presence would dramatically improve bilateral ties. What Saudi officials were equally determined to do, however, was to no longer tolerate the kind of duplicitous declarations stated as clearly as possible. The Saudis were determined to oppose Iranian interferences in Arab affairs, even if they fully understood that this was easier said than done. most were amply aware that Rouhani was merely the Iranian head of state and that real decisions were made by the supreme guide, Ayatollah Khamenei, whose revolutionary preferences were legendary. Consequently, the Al-Saud understood that the Iranian decision-making process was multi-pronged and that there was really no immediate prospect for a dramatic change in the Iranian attitude towards Arab societies living through uprisings, revolutions, and wars. Rouhani made it clear that he preferred to foster a more normal bilateral relationship with Saudi Arabia, but that was about it. On the Saudi side, and even if domestic trends are not as clear as elsewhere because of succession problems, aging leadership, etc., there was little doubt that the Al-Saud spoke as a single voice in their opposition to Iran's tacit involvements in so many Arab countries. Comically, observers focused on the alleged removal of the Syria file from Prince Bandar bin Sultan's hands that some believed ushered in a fresh period that would see milder policies. Now, I'm going to skip several pages here in the paper because I don't have time in which I talk about this Bandar situation, but it's very funny. Lest we lose sight of what transpired during the past few months, it was important to note that routine changes at the Saudi decision-making level, ministers being promoted, etc., on Iran and Syria policies were just that, routine permutations. The fundamentals were not altered, and while Riyadh was concerned that both Tehran and Damascus continued to apply their iron fists with impunity, the Saudi monarch was not worried about the domestic political consequences of continued regional sectarian conflict. Naturally, there were several indications that Riyadh might be refocusing on the potential domestic blowback of continued fighting in Syria, including the adoption of a law with harsh penalties for Saudis who join foreign wars, which of course is a clear and unadulterated declaration that the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization, and various pressures on GCC partners to reduce support for the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups regionally, and to stop providing financial aid if possible. Now, to the extent that Riyadh concentrated far more on extremist elements from within the Sunni world that challenged its authority, it might be less willing to compromise with its enemies without abandoning its existential confrontation with Iran. Again, I'm going to skip several pages in the presentation for lack of time, but few quibbled with the fact that Iran was a major regional power whose leaders sought inclusion in the family of nations, even if past approaches under the Shah and the mullahs alike proved to be quite problematic. Sometimes a country's leaders create their own worst dilemmas and pose serious challenges that stand in contradiction to what ordinary men and women aspire towards. Iranians are gentle, they're frugal, and they're humble people, though the same cannot be said about their leaders that probably led several to commit a multitude of errors. Neither the Shah nor his successors learned from Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher and poet who contributed to the rise of Taoism, and who once said, I quote, "I have three precious things which I hold fast and prize. The first is gentleness, the second is frugality, the third is humility, which keeps me from putting myself before others." He continued, "Be gentle and you can be bold, be frugal and you can be liberal. Avoid putting yourself before others and you can become a leader among men." There is a lesson in there, not just for Iran, but for everybody. Now, I conclude with the following. Recent reports that Saudi Arabia and Iran have engaged in what some labeled a fresh rapprochement raised the optimism bar. Of course, while the resumption of relatively harmonious relations between the two countries was bound to affect several regional concerns, there was little to indicate that the reminder by Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal that his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif was welcome to visit Riyadh would dramatically alter existing differences. To be sure, Saudi-Iranian ties were critical to stabilization initiatives in the rest of the Arab world. No one will deny that, especially in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt, etc. Ostensibly because Riyadh and Tehran were the principal external supporters of the key protagonists in so many arenas. That was and remained the case today, which meant that Saudi Arabia was able and willing to invest the energy to alter the equation, naturally to serve its own long-term interests. And towards that end, the decision to return the Saudi ambassador to Beirut, for example, was an illustration that Riyadh wished to prevent further destabilization in Lebanon, even if the spillover effects of the Syrian civil war continued to determine the direction that events in that country were most likely to follow. In other words, what Saudi leaders wanted was to further isolate Lebanon from the more or less permanent destabilization underway in Syria and perhaps work in earnest to reduce Sunni-Shia tensions across the region without providing a victory to Iran in either country. Another example was the lowering of tensions in Syria itself, allegedly with a reluctant acceptance that the Bashar al-Assad regime was most likely to stay in power while opposition forces licked their wounds. To some extent, these tangential evolutions in Saudi policies led observers to conclude that Riyadh was unhappy with Washington on account of confusing American initiatives led by President Barack Obama's failure to take strong military action against Syria after Damascus used chemical weapons to kill hundreds at Al-Ghouta in August 2013. That, inter alia, prompted Saudi Arabia to forego a coveted 2-year term at the UN Security Council, as well as introduce critical personnel changes. Many salivated the news, as I said earlier, that Prince Bandar bin Sultan, the very powerful National Security Council advisor and head of the Saudi Istikhbarat in those days, and apparently the man most disliked by the Obama administration, was relieved of his intelligence post. Yet, it would probably be an error to misread the routine changes as any signs of policy transformations, because Saudi Arabia and Iran were in many ways the drivers of the new Middle East Cold War. In the words of a colleague, Gregory Gause, an astute academic who concentrates his work on the Gulf region, Saudi-Iranian relations were conflictual because the two governments represented two opposite poles of Islamist politics, a revolutionary republic versus a conservative monarchy, each claiming that it speaks more legitimately for Islam in the political sphere. In fact, as Toby Matheson also discussed in his book, Sectarian Gulf, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the Arab Gulf, and the Arab Spring that wasn't, the Sunni-Shia divide grew sharper given mutual antagonisms that drew succor from centuries-old regional dogmas. When one added natural geopolitical rivalries in a super-sensitive region that affected the economic welfare of the entire planet, it was absolutely clear that bilateral ties would be tense. Now, notwithstanding historical legacies, the recent Obama stop in Riyadh for a meeting with King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz probably sharpened the Saudi view that Washington was determined to cut a deal with Tehran. That in turn prompted the Saudi monarch and other senior members of the ruling family to reassess their positions. It was within such a context that the putative Saudi-Iranian conversation must be assessed, cognizant that the United States remained deeply committed to the defense of the Arab Gulf states, best illustrated by the presence of the then Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel at the first ever meeting of the Gulf Cooperation Council Joint Defense Council in Jeddah. Given Tehran's oft-declared allergies to a long-term American military presence in the region, Hagel's assurances that Washington would not sell them out, guard the area, and keep sea lanes open for the indefinite future, affirmed that what really mattered. Even the departure of Prince Bandar's half-brother, Defense Minister Prince Sultan Deputy Defense Minister Prince Salman bin Sultan, a day after Hagel left the kingdom, did not alter the country's permanent relationships with the US. Under the circumstances, Saudi Arabia may well have softened, Under the circumstances, Saudi Arabia may well have softened its tough approach to Iran, though it was important to note that it accompanied this with an unprecedented parade that came to an end of planned maneuvers that involved 130,000 men, which also displayed Chinese-supplied missiles capable of hitting Tehran. It was crystal clear to note that Riyadh was more than happy to negotiate with Tehran on a slew of items, but always from a position of strength. Ultimately, the Saudi decision to elevate the conversation with Iran was meant to send clear messages across the board to the West in general and the United States in particular that Riyadh remained the principal Arab driver, to Tehran that the latter's continued adventurism to Arab world was bound to elicit strong responses, and finally to the conservative Arab Gulf monarchies that it, that is Saudi Arabia, was the principal regional power and intended to preserve its position. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you, George. I think I thought American had committed himself to time, but you became like the Arab. Always took 5 minutes more. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, last speaker we have Dr. Fatima Samadi.
Dr. Fatima al-Smadi. She will talk about the Gulf and Iranian discourse, strategy, security, and energy. She's a graduate from Jordan. She's specialized in the Iranian affairs. She speaks Farsi fluently. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will speak differently. I will speak the neighbor we do not know, the neighbor who has influenced us greatly, and till date we are not able to influence them. I will address this issue from different approach. Even the conception of the Iranian towards us and what we have in mind about them. This will focus on the conception, whether in the minds of the public or the officials. I am addressing these approaches from the perspective of the nuclear issue of Iran and the Iranian-American rapprochement. I will not delve in details. However, in order to understand the Iranian discourse, we should abandon the issue that this discourse is exclusive, and we have to exclude from political theories. I recommend that we deal with a bidirectional, the theory of the role, what role is Iran willing to take, and also to understand the environment surrounding the decision-making process or the decision-makers who hands down these decisions. Therefore, in my paper, I will try to analyze or interpret political theories. We start at the theory of chaos, as chaos allows states to resort to behaviors that enable them to achieve power and more power. And what Iran has been trying for years, it's to achieve power and more power. Rapprochement or openness between Iran and the West, this should be interpreted as a very substantial, influential factor, namely the Iranian-American rapprochement on the GCC, in particular the Saudi Arabia. Why? Because a few years ago we were speaking about the balance of power. This shift was in favor of Iran. After that, it shifted with the occupation of Iraq, as Iran managed to extend its influence to reach Yemen. Why Iraq? Because Iraq is the key to the Iranian influence. It is also the key to curb this influence. So long as Iraq is beyond the circle of attention of the Arab world, any effort or attempt to stand up to or confront the Iranian power will be unsuccessful. That's why Iraq is instrumental, even in the rapprochement between Iran and the U.S., the extension of Geneva Convention. There is clear coordination in terms of fighting ISIL. Let's look at the map. Central Asia. What's taking place? The American-Iranian coordination in Central Asia is clear. Even competition on the Iranian or Russian role in the area. These are some of the figures in order to evaluate where this neighbor stands and where we stand. 175,000 in 1980, 15,000 professor in 20 Iranian cities. In 2012, 4 million, I'm speaking on the higher education, the university, 4 million students, 110 associate professor in more than 120 cities. In 2010, Iran came at a rank higher than Brazil and Turkey in terms of human development indicator. The scientific publication in Iran increased from 736 in 96 to 13,238 in 28. Internet users increased 13,000%. I first doubted this number. I had to refer to more than one source. In 2012, Iran declared the establishment of the nanotechnology center, assigning 4% of its GDP for research. I am here just trying to draw a comparison between this neighbor and the GCC countries, how our neighbors acting and how we are acting. This paper stresses the issue of energy and oil. And here, I would like to stress that security in the Gulf is an Iranian demand before anybody else, simply for the reason that Iran needs a stable Gulf in order to be able to administer its nuclear program. Iran needs a stable Gulf in order to go on with its energy aspirations. Security of the Gulf is necessary to Iran's future investment and cooperation projects with China through trade routes with China through Iran. And I believe I recommend you refer to Rouhani recently issued book on the national security, wherein he detailed the north-south course or road. If successful, the Suez Canal will be useless. Some would say these are dreams. But if we look at this In view of the American-Iranian rapprochement, it is not merely dreams. It will be translated in Riyadh. If you look at these courses, all go through Iran. Recently, Iran has developed the internal transport network, buses, trains, in order to link the north to the south to achieve this project and bring it to reality. The issue that represents a great importance between the Persian and the Arab, the conception of the Iranians' conceptions of Arabs. This caused one of the Iranian officials to say, if I am willing to address or engage in dialogue with the teacher, why should I engage with the boy? That's why Iran resorted to open channels with the United States as a teacher and leave behind what it believes to be the boy. The Gulf, the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, the issue does not bring any sensitivity. If you look back to the old maps, you will find that historians use the Persian Gulf. However, it is a source of sarcasm and satire. I will show you this video. How our neighbor sees the Gulf and how the Gulf sees this neighbor. The perception to this Arab citizen who is believed to use his monetary power to purchase whatever he desires. Another video falls within context. It is created by the Iranian cartoon house, an official agent. That's why when we speak about this conception, it is very important in building confidence. In my paper, I speak about Iran's endeavor to adopt a joint security approach in the Gulf. It falls within the Iranian approach. It has environmental and other economic benefits, yet it requires a great deal of confidence. Confidence cannot be achieved without changing any misconception. Correcting the misconception among the Iranians is not of concern. However, I would like to pause at this point. A very side close to the government raised this question: how do you see the Arabs? And opened the way for articles and SMS for years. I collected and analyzed all the texts that have been published. I found them to fall in three classes. First is to revive the memory of difference and war. Second, threat. The Iranian media is charged with threats to the Arabs, to the Emiratis. If you wish to repossess the islands, you will go through sea and ocean of blood. We have taught the Arabs a lesson. Let the Gulf leaders take the lesson from the fall of Saddam. Do not play with a 2,500-year-old country. Even the Gulf of Oman will be renamed to Nakarar. The third is the underestimation in the media and the printed media, branding the other as traitor and agent to the United States. Therefore, here is a message published by a government close to government side. It is a message translated from one of the sheikhs, the leaders. He says he's addressing the Arab sheikhs and rulers to go back to history and read history that they have been receiving salaries from the mayor of Bandar Abbas. It is a message that go back in history, that abuse dates back to your forefathers. This kind of discourse and tone is not helpful in building confidence and trust. I conclude with the conclusions that some of it may not be included in the presentation. The Gulf region is on top of the priorities, strategic priorities of Iran. Iraq, Yemen are all cards to the benefit of this region. I mean the Iranians' efforts and approach. As I said, secure and peaceful Gulf is an interest of Iran, and this must be realized by the Gulf states. Redirecting approach towards Washington under Rouhani. That's true. The Iranian foreign policy towards the United States has changed. And that's why even in respect of the issues that were core to the Iranian revolution, I mean the Palestinian cause, is at the back drawer. And I believe that the Arab approach is Iraq, that countries must pay attention to Iraq. Second is the Palestinian cause. Second is to reinforce their ties with the Palestinian faction. You may use the Palestinian cause as a card as it is being used by Iran. I would like to emphasize one point, that rapprochement with the United States is based on political proximity and mutual interests. When we speak of interests, we can achieve this proximity. I conclude continued rapprochement, Iranian-American proximity, not only in Iraq, it reaches Central Asia. The arrangements of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan is coordinated with Iran. and therefore this gives Iran more leverage in many areas, including the Gulf, even greater than the Turkish influence and leverage in Syria and the Gulf. Thank you for listening. However, thank you for your presentation. However, we find this short film provocative. We have about 20 minutes. Thank you for the presentations. I have two questions. My first question to Dr. Joseph. In the past, many statements were made by the Israeli Zionist leaders about Iran, Saudi coordination in the face of the Iranian agenda. Today, we see the former National Security Advisor stating that the strategic and security coordination and cooperation with Saudi Arabia is maximized. Will we see in future open, disclosed cooperation between Arab countries and Israel to stand up to the Iranian agenda? Dr. Fatima, we might have differences or agreements with Iran. However, it's clear that they are adopting a true agenda and doing all they can to achieve it. The central question, where is the Sunni Arab agenda in the face of the Iranian one? And in your opinion, what is the reasons for the absence of this process? I have three comments to make on Dr. Fatma's presentation. All this criticism and the Iranian discourse is met by a similar discourse in the other direction. This is at the popular level. And when we plan to initiate good relations, all this could be set aside, even it exists at the level, a domestic level. All the recent projects of linking the areas have alternative in the Arab region, namely the Gulf, then Basra Gulf, and then the Arab bridge from Basra in Iraq that ends in Syria. I have three notes. They may include questions. It is clear that Mr. Mustafa addressed about the legal aspect and the legal characterization of the island, and I see it is loaded by huge Arab and international law. The question to ask, this case, why is not being used by the United Arab Emirates and use it diplomatically in order to have the islands restored. Second, with respect to the nature of different approaches between the GCC and Iran, I see four countries that have marine borders with Iran have almost positive relations with Iran, while it is not with Saudi Arabia. This discrepancy no doubt reflects on the internal relations between the GCC countries, Oman, Kuwait, and other GCC members. It is a result of very critical issues, namely, this relates to the response to the Iranian discourse in the region. The three wars, starting with the Iraq-Iranian war, we have seen an uprising trajectory. In the second war, the region was consumed. In the third war, Iraq regime was toppled. My question is the fourth confrontation will result in what? It is the strategic influence of Iran is rising, and this has a very significant impact in terms of war. I thank Dr. Fatima for her enthusiasm. What she spoke about is the crisis of an Arab state. The Arab state is not able to establish sound foreign relations simply due to the collapse of internal policies. You cannot establish sound, good external policy unless you have sound one inside. As a new regional regime is being formed or shaped in the region, there will remain three superpowers: Iran, Turkey, and Israel. The new regional pattern will exclude all the Arab states. This message should be addressed to the Saudi Arabia, who is believed by many to be the only country capable of achieving something here. I cannot speculate on the repercussions. Dr. Joseph, does your presentation mean that you expect partial agreements will take place between Iran and Saudi Arabia, especially that I've recently read about certain understanding on Yemen and Iraq? The fall of Sana'a requires a great deal of explanation. The Arab force can be built in the same time where we are engaging with Iran in dialogue. We should not be dragged by the U.S. warfare with Iran. The Arab should I thank Dr. Fatima al-Smadi for the paper, who exhibited the hidden and announced goals of Iran. To my surprise, are we facing a state agenda? On the other hand, whether individually or collectively, are we the Arab countries, unfortunately, are state in the process, in the making. And there's a big difference between a state in the process and a state agenda. Iran has a strategic agenda, and the absence of similar agendas in the Arab countries is visible, as there is no clear foreign policy. There is no vision in dealing with the other countries. I find it surprising as certain countries try to come closer to Iran. Others are trying to engage in dialogue. Others are trying to mend fences between Iran and the Western countries, namely the US. I believe my question is to address to Dr. Fatima. What is the Arab policy towards Iran's actions? Is there an Arab action plan? I have certain notes relating to the same topic. I believe that we look at the Iranian community or masses as one block with the same collective conception, which is untrue. Not all the Iranians have the same ideology or conceptions. Also, there is a linkage between the doctrine or sectarian state, which is a confusion by Iran and other anti-Iran. As we are branding all the Shiite Arabs as part of Iran. I also agree with Dr. Abdul Wahab, as the same discourse presented by Dr. Fatima has a counterpart countering similar discourse in the Arab world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on my behalf, I believe that these conceptions are available in all the countries. Sometimes media warfare is ignited on Facebook, for example. You may remember what happened between Algeria and Egypt on a football match. I believe these are minor issues that does not deserve that much of attention. I would like to draw Dr. Fatma's attention to a very significant point. Do you believe that the political regime of Iran is in need of preferring to maintain a neighboring hostility or animosity to serve its domestic goals? That's why Iran is adopting hostile animosity with the neighboring countries to serve its own political domestic affairs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue of the Arab-Iranian relations is very thorny. The question I would like to raise to Dr. Fatma and all the panelists: do you believe, by virtue of being closely monitoring the Iranian affairs, that there has been a change in the political stance currently compared to that under the Shah? In other words, are there certain issues that may enjoy a great amount of proximity between ourselves and Iran following the Islamic Revolution? Second is that the Iran as a state has the right to have its own strategies in the region. The questions that have been asked by many: where is our strategy? We cannot put the blame on Iran. It is part of our problem. We are not engaged in dialogue with them. We are also in conflict with them for certain issues. I even see that the United Arab Emirates does not have a solid case in the diplomatic fronts. Third, we have a problem in the Arab and Gulf mind, which led to a misconception that where Iran's role is being magnified when we say that Iran is total control of Yemen and have firmed its grip on certain areas. We give unnecessary credit. We should speak on the Iranian conception towards Arab. What is the Arab conception towards Iran? I'm still a student at Qatar University. My direct question to Dr. Zef, don't you see that Iran's policy in the region is still a policy of sidelining marginalization, as it wishes to maintain the supreme single player in the region rather than sharing the game with other key players like Saudi Arabia as counter player? Mr. Chairman, the problem is not the Iranian islands. We have forgotten Khuzestan and Arabistan. We are a great nation. The majority of our people from Europe, Russian Federation, European Union. We are the people with the most gobbled riches. Septem Iran, Morocco, Sanafir and Tehran, Palestine and Al-Issa Mosque. Why are we gobbled up by the people? Where is our force? Not necessarily to be force of weapon or blood. It should be an economic form. I have been listening about Iran. I haven't heard anything about ISIL or the Houthis. I have two notes and one quick question. The key point is Iran's power is attributed to our weakness. Iran is bleeding within. If sanctions continued, it will bring Iran to its knees. They must sell oil at $140 per barrel to break even. Now it is being sold at 60. It used to export 3 million, now it's exporting 1 million. So far, it has come to the negotiating table, and as I can see, sanctions are bearing fruit. We have no long-term. Iran is a central, strong state, and in the international relations, what's doing is lawful. The other issue, and I here thank the speakers, I had wished that Dr. Fatima, and I thank her for this wonderful presentation, to write the Arabian Gulf. I have been to Iran in 90s. I was speaking to the deaf. They do not say Gulf. We only say Gulf. If we go back to history, it was the Gulf of Basra. Half of the discussions in all the conferences to which the Iranians take part is consumed on the name of the Gulf. And I believe that the Iranians have supremacy complex. They look at themselves as a central, strong state, robust state, Persian civilization. And the worst thing that happened to them, that the Arabs came to them and brought Islam along. They have Arab research and study centers more than we have of the Persian ones. Abdul Nasser al-Muqaddam, writer from Yemen. I uphold what Abdullah said. Iran's role is being magnified. What took place in Yemen is not an Iranian victory as much it is of Gulf failure. That's why Houthi extended in a vacuum resulting from domestic loyalties and Iranian support, which is not here, and therefore the Gulf countries must reconsider to reinvigorate their role in Yemen, as Yemen is on the brink of collapse. We thank all the speakers, namely Ms. Fatima, how the Iranians are looking at the Arabs. However, there are more radical views on the other bank. My question to the organizers. Now we speak of the Gulf GCC Gulf Cooperation Council, who has a ministerial high-level meeting after tomorrow. Isn't it more useful if we address direct messages to the Gulf leaders? Today we are speaking of Iran. Why we are addressing the issue separately? Oman is mediating between the Americans and the Iranians. We were not informed by the Americans. Now you are our friends, the members. Saad al-Faisal says we welcome the reef visit, and then the Iranians say we don't have this. What is Qatar, Kuwait? What is every country is doing? I believe there must be a uniform Gulf policy. They have ambitions for expansion. We are not one country. We are not one bloc. Mr. Omar addressed the audience in the opening ceremony. Why shouldn't he say the reasons for the failure in Yemen, where the Houthis took control? I hope that the organizers here should be more frank and address questions directly to the leaders who are meeting. Iran's agenda is clear: to reinforce its influence in the region. We are lacking transparency. All these people of the countries, thinkers, intellectuals, must have their say. And the leaders, the rulers, must hear the views of the people towards their decision. I have two major issues with respect to the islands, regardless of the legal aspects. This was part of the deal, documented and the public opinion, the Kuwaiti newspaper published openly. And when citizens took to the street to demonstrate, they were persecuted. Turkey is occupying Iskenderun, Spain, Andalusia. Now, speaking of an Arab Sunni project, agenda, enterprise, in the face of Shiite enterprise, we are calling to fuel the division. Rather than listening to the voice of reason, we are fueling tension and rift. So we should listen to the voice of reason. We should be more objective. We are destined to have common roots with the Iranians. How many is the number of research and studies centers? We always describe them as the Persian Majus, worshippers of fire. We should listen to the voice of reason. We are not here to incite and provocate. In brief, I answer in Arabic, and forgive me for my grammatical mistakes. We do not have direct relations between GCC countries and Israel before an independent Palestinian state comes in existence. It is a dream in the foreseeable future. The problem with Yemen is that there exists no shared interest between Iran and Saudi Arabia on Yemen. There is a competition, a conflict between the two states on the future of Yemen. And the Iranian intervention in the Arabian Peninsula is a fact. The Iranian presence in Yemen is true and factual. We must consider how to develop relations in the future. I repeat once again, there is no shared interest. It is impossible for the Iranians and the Saudi to dream of a coalition. Here is what we say GCC. If the conference were in Iran, it would be the BGCC. They are not here indicating to the islands. They are meaning to refer to the countries of the Persian Gulf countries. Dr. Abdullah indicated a very significant point. Iran is a very weak country, yet it is repulsed. It is weak with its economy and domestic internal differences that are growing. However, Iran is a strong country as the ambitions of the leaders since the Shah till today are the same, unchanged. There is a direct goal to take full control of the Gulf countries, the Gulf region. And the living proof for this is the nuclear issue. Iran believes that it is a superpower like the United States and Europe. It's a long-term enterprise. However, the presence and existence of an Arab awareness is very significant. The coming phase is very difficult, to my opinion. As our fellow colleague says, we are tension charged. And as you may see, Europe was engaged in the First and Second World Wars, speaking 24 countries, and now they are one bloc. Wars take place. However, people should listen to the voice of reason. And I am happy that you are satisfied with Oman's role, the positive role to ensure coexistence in the region, away from the Sunni enterprise or the Shia threat. We are professors. We should be objective in our analysis and in our comparison. We should not manipulate words or attain personal gains from the current state of affairs. I replied to the question. I said that the political misleading corrupts the legal characterization of all the Arab cases. We do not blame Iran to have its own enterprise of expansion. We are to blame. Iran is serving its own purposes. Iran under the Shah had an expansion enterprise in a nationalism spirit. The same enterprise is now in place in a religious cloak. Just like women prevailed over men, politics has prevailed over the law. In order to present your case before the international courts, both the adversaries must agree. Iran has rejected the proposal since 1971. That's why the United Arab Emirates has no alternative but to seek amicable settlement. Quick notes, the point I would like to stress. I said within the theoretical perspective that it is very important to be aware of the environment in which the political decision is made. That's why I spoke about the map of conception of the Iranian leaders. I did not bring more examples, and I have also similar comparison among Arab countries towards Iran. We should be aware and understand the environment in which a decision is made in Iran. How can we reach a level of understanding while you are described as ignorant, backward? What I meant is this misconception, Iranian misconception, must be rectified. Unfortunately, the Arab revolutions was the shock that was needed, yet it was throttled at birth by the Arab states. The Arab enterprises was at the hands of the Arab young youth. It was murdered. It was throttled at birth by the Arab leaders. The Arab revolutions has brought the shock to this misconception, as the Arabs are always described as the subdued, submissive. I call for dialogue with Iran. Iran is a neighbor. It is never absent. Yet how can we engage in a dialogue? It should be proportional and equal. How can you engage in a dialogue while you are weak? Many questions to raise. Many questions have been raised. Yet Iran is in control or not. Few years I spoke about an American-Iranian deal, and in 2012, and the Saudi were among the audience, and Iran will be stricken like Iraq. Iran is in control. Iran has the upper say in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen. Is this influence the result of our weakness? I was in Afghanistan. There is a huge influence of Iran in Afghanistan that is not present to the Saudi Arabia. We should also address the problems of the Iranian problems. It is also part of the Arab enterprise and has its own reasons. I thank all the speakers, Dr. George, Dr. Muhammad, Dr. Said, and Dr. Fatima. Thank you very much.